Imagine this scenario. You walk towards your mailbox, a mundane daily ritual. It is just like any other ordinary day. But nestled inside among the bills and junk mail, an unfamiliar envelope waits. It feels deceptively ordinary in your hand. Until you slide your finger under the flap and open it. The words inked onto the paper inside are anything but ordinary. They speak of impending darkness. They whisper of a human life about to be brutally extinguished. A complete stranger has written to you, warning you of something truly terrible, not about some trivial neighborhood gossip or a misdelivered package. No, this is a premonition of murder. A murder that has not yet stained the fabric of the world with its grim reality. The letter details it all with chilling precision. The name of the unsuspecting victim, the exact place of their future demise, even the specific grim method that will be employed. How could anyone possibly know such things? The crisp paper feels unnervingly cold against your fingertips. Suddenly the familiar, comforting street visible outside your front window seems alien, imbued with a subtle menace. The everyday sounds of your home, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic, begin to fade into an unnerving stillness. They are replaced by a profound, chilling silence that seems to emanate from the letter itself. Disbelief immediately wars with a slowly creeping, insidious dread that tightens its grip around your heart. Could this be some kind of sick, twisted joke? A cruel, elaborate prank meticulously designed to unnerve and terrify you? You read the stark words again, and then again. Each subsequent reading chips away relentlessly at your protective wall of skepticism. The details provided are far too precise, too unnervingly confident. The sender, of course, remains entirely anonymous. A faceless, nameless author foretelling future horror, leaving you alone with a terrifying, impossible secret. A heavy burden you never ever asked to carry. What are you supposed to do? Who could you possibly tell? Days begin to pass, each one stretching into an eternity. Long, agonizing days filled with a quiet terror. The letter, whether hidden away in a drawer or left in plain sight, sits heavy on your mind. It becomes a constant, unwelcome, intrusive presence in your thoughts. You try with all your might to dismiss its horrifying contents. You attempt to push it to the recesses of your consciousness, to simply forget. But the specific date mentioned in the ominous letter approaches inexorably, like a dark, relentless countdown to an unknown horror. Then, the news breaks, shattering the fragile peace you tried to maintain. This was not destined to be a singular, isolated, terrifying event. It was not a one-off descent into the darkest corners of the macabre, quickly forgotten. The first letter, unsettling as it was, proved to be merely a harbinger of more dread to come. It was simply the opening act, a disturbing overture, the chilling prelude to an unfolding symphony of fear that would grip an entire community. More letters would inevitably follow in its wake. Each new envelope delivered a fresh wave of terror. Each one contained a new verse in this dark, unfolding narrative of death foretold. Each subsequent prediction seemed more audacious, more detailed, more profoundly unsettling than the last. The watcher, it became apparent, was not content with a single terrifying prophecy. They clearly had a disturbing message to send, or perhaps more chillingly, they had a twisted game to play. A deadly game where the ultimate stakes were human lives and the complex, horrifying rules were known only, exclusively to them. The insidious tendrils of terror were just beginning to spread their cold grip. This unfolding, slow-motion nightmare found its unfortunate stage in the quiet, unassuming town of Grey Ridge, Pennsylvania. A town that could have been any town, anywhere. Characterized by its peaceful, tree-lined streets, adorned with familiar, welcoming homes. A place where neighbors often knew each other by name, sharing pleasantries over garden fences. The kind of quintessential small town where children played freely and safely in their yards until dusk. Where the general rhythm of daily life was comfortably predictable, reassuringly comforting. Into this idyllic haven of perceived normalcy, the watcher's cryptic and menacing letters began to seep like a slow-acting, invisible poison. Gradually, inexorably, transforming the mundane into the menacing. Every familiar shadow in every familiar lane seemed to lengthen, to distort. Every unexpected sudden sound made hearts leap into throats. The ordinary comforting backdrop of everyday life became a stage for extraordinary, paralyzing dread. No one felt truly safe anymore. The familiar had become frighteningly, chillingly unfamiliar. Susan Mallory lived a life painted in the quiet hues of predictability. Her home in Grey Ridge, Pennsylvania was a sanctuary of routine, nestled on a street much like any other in the tranquil town. Days unfolded with a gentle rhythm, coffee brewing in the morning, the rustle of the local newspaper, polite greetings exchanged with familiar faces during her afternoon walks. Grey Ridge itself was a portrait of small-town America, a place where the changing seasons were marked by community festivals, and the comforting illusion of safety was rarely, if ever, shattered. It was a town where people believed they knew their neighbors, where the shadows held no monsters, only the peaceful descent of twilight. Little did Susan know, an ordinary Tuesday was about to unravel this comforting tapestry of normalcy, thread by insidious thread. The familiar was about to become terrifyingly alien, starting with a simple trip to her mailbox. The mail often brought the mundane, bills, advertisements, perhaps a postcard from a distant relative. On that particular afternoon, the sun cast long shadows as Susan retrieved the day's collection. Among the expected envelopes, one felt slightly different. It was a plain white business-sized envelope, unremarkable in its anonymity. There was no colorful stamp, no handwritten flourishes, just a typed address. Her address. There was no return address printed in the corner, no clue as to its origin or sender. It seemed sterile, almost clinical, lacking any personal touch that might hint at its contents. It did not scream for attention. It did not whisper of danger. It simply was. Just another piece of paper waiting to be opened, to be processed, and then, most likely, discarded without a second thought. A silent harbinger of a terror she could not yet fathom. Susan unfolded the single sheet of paper. Her eyes scanned the typed lines, at first with mild curiosity, then with a growing sense of bewilderment. The message was brief, devoid of any greeting or salutation, stripped of any emotional inflection. It was a cold, hard statement of a future event. The words leapt off the page, stark and brutal against the white background. On April 9th it began, the date standing out like a brand. A man named Timothy Granger will be found dead in Pine Creek Woods. The sentence hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Each word was a hammer blow against the fragile shield of her everyday reality. Pine Creek Woods. She knew the place. A sprawling, dense area of wilderness just outside of town, popular with hikers but also known for its secluded, shadowy trails. A place where one could easily get lost or be made to disappear. Timothy Granger. The name meant nothing to her. She searched her memory but no face, no connection emerged. Was he a local figure? Someone from a neighboring town? The letter offered no further clues, no context, just the chilling pronouncement of his impending death. The simplicity of the message was perhaps its most terrifying aspect. It was not a rambling manifesto of a disturbed mind. It was not a vague, cryptic warning open to multiple interpretations. It was a precise, factual declaration, as if the sender was merely stating an unalterable truth, an event already set in stone, waiting only for the calendar page to turn. The cold, mechanical precision of the typed letters seemed to underscore the sender's detachment, their chilling certainty, a dreadful certainty that began to seep into Susan's own mind despite her every instinct to reject it. A wave of nausea washed over Susan, her hand trembled as she held the paper. This had to be a joke, a very sick, twisted, and cruel joke. Who would do such a thing? What kind of person derived pleasure from terrorizing an innocent stranger with such a macabre prediction? She read the words again, and then a third time, hoping to find some flaw, some hint of fabrication, some reason to dismiss it all as a prank. But the stark finality of the message offered no such comfort. The date, April 9th, was just 3 days away. A cold dread began to coil in the pit of her stomach, tightening its icy grip. This felt different. This felt real. The anonymity of the sender, the specificity of the victim and location, it all pointed away from a casual prank. It felt like a deliberate, calculated act. The silence of her kitchen, once a comforting backdrop to her day, now seemed to amplify the horrifying words on the page. Every tick of the clock sounded like a countdown. What was she supposed to do with this terrible knowledge? Go to the police? They would surely dismiss her as a crank, or worse, suspect her of something. Tell her husband? Her friends? How could she explain this bizarre, terrifying letter without sounding unhinged? The burden of the secret felt immense, crushing. The Watcher had not just predicted a death. They had made Susan Mallory an unwilling participant in their dark game, a silent keeper of a horrifying prophecy. Her peace was stolen, replaced by a gnawing fear and a terrible, paralyzing uncertainty about what the coming days would bring. The 3 days that followed the letter's arrival were an agonizing blur for Susan Mallory. Sleep offered little escape, her nights haunted by the stark, typed words and the unknown face of Timothy Granger. During the day, a pervasive anxiety shadowed her every move. The letter, hidden away in a drawer, felt like a malevolent presence in her home, a constant, silent reminder of the impending date. April 9th. The date was seared into her consciousness, a looming deadline for a horror she desperately hoped would not materialize. She found herself rereading the letter countless times, each reading deepening her fear, rather than offering any clarity or solace. The world outside her window, once familiar and comforting, now seemed to hold hidden threats. Every shadow seemed a little darker, every unexpected noise made her jump. Susan wrestled endlessly with the terrible dilemma of what to do. The instinct to warn someone, to prevent a potential tragedy, warred with the fear of disbelief and ridicule. If she went to the police with this anonymous, outlandish letter, how would they react? Would they launch an investigation based on such flimsy, bizarre evidence? Or would they simply dismiss her concerns, labeling her as hysterical or, even more troublingly, somehow involved? She pictured their skeptical faces, their probing questions. The thought of involving her family, of burdening them with this inexplicable terror, was equally daunting. How could she make them understand the chilling certainty that had taken root in her own heart? So, she kept the secret locked inside, a corrosive burden that isolated her in her own fear. The Watcher's words had effectively silenced her, trapping her in a state of anxious paralysis. As April 9th drew nearer, Susan's sense of dread intensified. Each passing hour felt like a tick on a doomsday clock, counting down to a moment she prayed would never arrive. She became hyper-aware of her surroundings, scrutinizing faces in the local grocery store, wondering if Timothy Granger was among them, oblivious to the dark fate supposedly awaiting him. The name, once unknown, now echoed relentlessly in her thoughts. She found herself compulsively checking local news websites, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and a desperate hope that the day would pass uneventfully, proving the letter to be nothing more than a cruel, elaborate hoax. The weight of knowing, or rather, the weight of possibly knowing, was almost unbearable. She felt utterly helpless, a spectator to a tragedy she had been warned about but felt powerless to prevent. The normalcy of Grey Ridge life continued around her, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging within. People went about their business, unaware of the dark prophecy that had landed on Susan's doorstep. This disconnect amplified her sense of isolation. Was she the only one who knew? The only one carrying this terrible premonition? The Watcher, whoever they were, had succeeded in making her feel uniquely vulnerable, singled out. The letter was not just a prediction, it was a psychological torment. It forced her to confront the terrifying possibility that someone out there possessed an unnatural knowledge of life and death, and had chosen, for reasons unknown, to share a sliver of that darkness with her. The final hours leading up to April 9th stretched into an eternity of suspense and quiet terror. April 9th dawned like any other spring day in Grey Ridge. The sun shone, birds sang, and the world outside Susan Mallory's window appeared deceptively peaceful. But for Susan, a knot of unbearable tension had tightened in her stomach. She moved through the morning in a fog of anxiety, her ears straining for any snippet of news, her eyes constantly drawn to the clock. Every phone ring, every siren in the distance, sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. She tried to busy herself with mundane tasks, but the words of the letter replayed in her mind. Timothy Granger will be found dead in Pine Creek Woods. She prayed it was a lie. She prayed the day would end, and the letter would become a forgotten, bizarre memory. But a deeper, colder part of her feared the worst. Then the news began to filter through, first as unconfirmed whispers, then as stark headlines on local news channels and websites. A body discovered. A hiker had stumbled upon a grim scene deep within Pine Creek Woods. Susan's breath caught in her throat, her heart hammered against her ribs. She felt a chilling wave of cold wash over her even as she frantically sought more information. The details were sparse initially, but the location was an exact match. Pine Creek Woods. The name of the victim was not immediately released, and for a fleeting, desperate moment, Susan clung to the hope that it was a tragic coincidence, unrelated to the letter's horrifying claim. But the cold dread that had been her constant companion for days told her otherwise. The Watcher's prophecy was on the verge of its terrible fulfillment. The confirmation came later that day. It was a brutal, undeniable validation of the letter's contents. The victim was identified as Timothy Granger, a man from a neighboring county. He had been found shot twice in the chest. A .38 revolver lay discarded nearby, a silent testament to the violence that had occurred in the quiet woods. Every horrifying detail aligned with the chilling tale now unfolding. The letter was not a hoax. It was not a prank. It was a terrifyingly accurate premonition of murder. Susan stared at the news report on her television screen, the colors seeming too bright, the reporter's voice too calm for the horror it conveyed. The world around her seemed to tilt and sway. The unimaginable had happened. The words on that plain sheet of paper had become a grim, bloody reality. A profound sense of shock, mixed with a chilling fear, enveloped Susan. The Watcher was real. This anonymous entity knew things they couldn't possibly know, and they had chosen to share this deadly foresight with her. Why? Why Susan Mallory, a woman with no connection to Timothy Granger, no apparent link to the crime itself? Was she supposed to have intervened? Could she have stopped it? The questions swirled in her mind, heavy and unanswerable. The relief that the waiting was over was instantly replaced by the horrifying weight of truth, and the dawning realization that this was not the end. It was merely the beginning. The Watcher had proven their terrible ability, and the town of Grey Ridge was about to learn that the shadows could indeed hold monsters. Very real, very patient monsters. After the horrifying confirmation of Timothy Granger's murder, a stunned silence fell over Grey Ridge. The initial shockwave had passed, leaving behind a residue of disbelief and a gnawing, unspoken fear. Had the nightmare ended as abruptly as it began? Was the first letter, the first death, an isolated act of some unseen, malevolent force? Many residents clung to this desperate hope. They prayed that the Watcher, this shadowy figure of dread, had delivered their singular, terrifying message and retreated back into the obscurity from which they had emerged. The police, though deeply unsettled by the impossible accuracy of the prediction, were left with few leads. How do you investigate a ghost? How do you hunt a predictor of doom who leaves no trace but fear? The town held its breath, waiting. Weeks crawled by. The initial raw terror began to dull, replaced by an uneasy, fragile calm. People started to breathe a little easier, though the memory of Timothy Granger and the mysterious letter lingered like a dark stain. Perhaps it was over. Perhaps the Watcher had moved on, satisfied with their grim display of foresight. But the Watcher was patient. The Watcher was not finished. Their silence was not an absence, but a pause. A deliberate, chilling interlude before the next act of their terrifying play. Then, just as a semblance of normalcy started to return, another letter surfaced. It was unmistakable. The same plain envelope, the same stark typed lettering, the same cold, emotionless pronouncement of a fate yet to unfold. The Watcher was back. This new missive, however, did not arrive at a private residence. It did not target another unsuspecting individual like Susan Mallory, forcing them to bear the terrible secret alone. No, this time, the Watcher chose a different audience. The letter was sent directly to the offices of the Grey Ridge Chronicle, the local newspaper. The very institution dedicated to reporting the news was now receiving a premonition of it. The editor, a seasoned journalist named Arthur Jenkins, initially dismissed it. He had seen his share of cranks and attention seekers over the years, but something about this letter, its chilling specificity, its echo of the Granger case details which were known but certainly not broadcasted, made him pause. A cold knot began to form in his stomach. He remembered the whispers, the fear. The contents were as direct and devoid of emotion as the first. Another name, another date, another precise location. The Watcher was not merely repeating their previous act, they were escalating. By sending the letter to the newspaper, they were ensuring a wider audience for their grim prophecies. They were daring the authorities, daring the public to listen, to watch, to wait. The message was clear. The first death was not an anomaly, it was a statement of intent. A dark pattern was beginning to emerge from the shadows, a pattern woven with threads of fear and chillingly accurate predictions of death. The entire town was about to become a captive audience to the Watcher's horrifying, unfolding narrative. The brief respite was over. The terror had returned, more potent than before. The second letter, now spread across Arthur Jenkins's desk at the Grey Ridge Chronicle, felt heavier than its physical weight suggested. It was a harbinger, a cold piece of paper that promised more darkness. Jenkins, after a long, troubled night, made the difficult decision. He contacted the police. The authorities, already grappling with the inexplicable Granger case, received this new information with a grim sense of foreboding. The Watcher was not a fading nightmare. They were an active, present threat. The letter was chillingly specific, leaving no room for comforting ambiguity. It declared with that same unnerving certainty, "A teacher will fall. Linda Crowley. April 27th, North Parking Lot." Another life, another name, another meticulously planned demise, laid out for them to witness. The name Linda Crowley immediately sent investigators scrambling. Who was she? Was she connected to Timothy Granger? Was there some hidden link between these seemingly random targets? The police launched a hurried, desperate search. They scoured local records, school databases, anything that might lead them to this new potential victim. Time was, once again, their enemy. April 27th loomed, just over a week away. The pressure was immense. They had been warned before and a man had died. They could not, would not let it happen again. The Watcher's challenge was implicit. "I'm telling you what will happen. Try and stop me." It was a cruel, taunting game, and human lives were the pawns. Their search quickly yielded a result. There was indeed a Linda Crowley living in Grey Ridge. She was a well-respected second-grade teacher at the local elementary school. A woman known for her kindness, her dedication to her students, her quiet, unassuming life. She seemed the unlikeliest of targets. Why her? The question hung heavy in the air, unanswerable. The police now faced a terrible dilemma. How much should they tell her? How do you inform someone that an anonymous, possibly clairvoyant entity has predicted their murder? They decided to approach her cautiously, to offer protection without revealing the full, terrifying scope of the Watcher's letter, hoping to prevent widespread panic while still safeguarding her life. The north parking lot of her school became a focal point of their concern. Linda Crowley, the teacher, was understandably bewildered and frightened when the police informed her of a potential, unspecified threat. She cooperated fully, agreeing to police surveillance and taking precautions. The days leading up to April 27th were filled with a suffocating tension. Police officers, both uniformed and plainclothes, maintained a constant, watchful presence around her home, her school, especially the north parking lot mentioned in the letter. They were determined to prevent another tragedy. They were determined to prove the Watcher wrong, to break this emerging pattern of death. They believed they had identified the target. They believed they had the location secured. They waited, bracing themselves for a confrontation, for a sign, for anything. The Watcher, however, had other plans, other cruel deceptions yet to unfold. The day of April 27th arrived under a cloud of intense police scrutiny and unspoken community anxiety. All eyes, it seemed, were on Linda Crowley, the Grey Ridge Elementary School teacher. Officers meticulously monitored the north parking lot of her school, a place now imbued with a sinister significance thanks to the Watcher's chilling words. Every approaching vehicle was noted, every unfamiliar face scrutinized. The school day progressed with an undercurrent of unease, but without incident. As the final bell rang and teachers and students began to depart, the tension among the observing officers reached its peak. They watched as Linda Crowley, escorted by plainclothes detectives, safely left the school premises, avoiding the now infamous north parking lot entirely as a precaution. Evening fell, and a collective, cautious sigh of relief began to ripple through the police department. Perhaps they had done it. Perhaps their visible presence, their preparedness, had deterred the Watcher or whatever dark force was at play. Maybe the letter this time had been a bluff, a twisted attempt to sow fear without the accompanying bloodshed. The night passed without any reported incident concerning the Grey Ridge teacher. The following morning there was a sense that a bullet had been dodged, a crisis averted. But this fragile sense of victory was premature. It was about to be shattered by a piece of news from a neighboring town, a piece of news that would send a fresh wave of cold horror through everyone involved. The Watcher, it turned out, was far more cunning, their knowledge far more disturbingly precise than anyone had dared to imagine. The report came in late the next morning. A woman named Linda Crowley had been found dead, not in Grey Ridge, but in the town of Oak Haven, some 30 miles away. She had been attacked in the north parking lot of the Oak Haven Community Library where she volunteered. The date of her death, April 27th. The victim, a retired high school history teacher. Her name was Linda Crowley. The Grey Ridge police had been protecting the wrong woman. The Watcher's prediction had been horrifyingly, impeccably accurate, down to the name, the date, and the precise type of location. The chilling realization dawned. The Watcher's knowledge wasn't just specific, it was almost supernaturally comprehensive, capable of distinguishing between two individuals with the same name, living in different towns. This revelation was a devastating blow. The police had focused all their resources on one Linda Crowley, while another, completely unknown to them as a target, had met the exact fate described in the letter. The Watcher hadn't just predicted a murder, they had seemingly orchestrated a perfect misdirection, leaving the authorities feeling helpless and outmaneuvered. The precision was terrifying. How could anyone possess such intricate, advanced knowledge? The fear in Grey Ridge and its surrounding communities intensified dramatically. If the Watcher could be this accurate, this elusive, who could possibly be safe? The letters were not just warnings, they were declarations of an almost omniscient power, a power that toyed with lives and mocked any attempt to intervene. The murder of the other Linda Crowley sent shockwaves far beyond Grey Ridge. The Watcher was no longer a localized phantom, their chilling influence was spreading, their predictions transcending town lines. It became terrifyingly apparent that this was not a series of random, disconnected events. A sinister pattern was undeniably emerging, each letter a new knot in an expanding web of fear and death. The Watcher's methods were consistent. The anonymous typed letters, the unnerving precision of names, dates, and locations, and, most horrifyingly, the unfailing accuracy of their prophecies. Each fulfilled prediction lent more credibility and thus more terror to the next. The public was now acutely aware of the Watcher's existence, and a palpable sense of dread began to grip the wider region. By now, several more letters had arrived, each one a fresh injection of poison into the community's psyche. Some were delivered to individuals, some to public officials, others to media outlets. Each new envelope was met with a sickening lurch of anticipation and fear. Who would be named next? Which quiet street or familiar landmark would become the next potential crime scene? The Watcher seemed to possess an almost godlike overview of the region, plucking names and places from the fabric of everyday life and marking them for tragedy. The authorities were overwhelmed, chasing shadows, trying to decipher a logic that seemed to defy all rational explanation. They were always one step behind, reacting to predictions rather than preventing them. The Watcher held all the cards. The nature of the predictions themselves began to paint a disturbing picture of the Watcher's mind. The details were never vague, they were never open to broad interpretation. It was shot twice in the chest or killed in the north parking lot. This specificity suggested an intimate, almost obsessive knowledge of the impending crimes. Was the Watcher merely an incredibly astute observer, piecing together clues invisible to everyone else? Or was their knowledge more direct, more sinister? The question of whether they were a prophet or a participant hung heavy in the air, unspoken but deeply felt. Each letter was a testament to their power, their ability to see or perhaps even to orchestrate these fatal encounters from a safe, anonymous distance. The community, once a collection of individuals, became united in a shared experience of fear. Doors were locked earlier, strangers were eyed with suspicion. The comfort of routine was replaced by a constant, low-level anxiety. The Watcher's letters had done more than just predict deaths. They had eroded trust, shattered peace, and turned neighbors into potential suspects or victims in each other's frightened imaginations. The pattern was clear. A letter would arrive, a brief, terrifying countdown would begin, and then, inevitably, news of another tragedy would confirm the Watcher's horrifying prescience. The web was tightening, and everyone felt like a potential fly, caught in the intricate, deadly design of an unseen spider. The reign of the Watcher was firmly, chillingly established. The relentless, chilling rhythm of the Watcher's predictions had now firmly taken hold. By this point, 6 letters had materialized from the ether. 6 ominous declarations of death. Each one had arrived with that same sterile, typed precision. Each one had proven to be horrifyingly, unerringly accurate. The initial shock that had followed the first murder had long since curdled into a pervasive, suffocating dread that blanketed Grey Ridge and its neighboring communities. No longer did people dismiss the letters as isolated incidents or the work of a disturbed but ultimately harmless prankster. The Watcher was a prophet of doom, their words etched in the blood of their foretold victims. The sheer number of successful predictions was a terrifying testament to their dark capabilities. 6 lives shadowed, then extinguished, all according to an unseen, meticulously crafted plan. Hope for a swift end to the terror had withered entirely. Daily life in Grey Ridge had become a pale imitation of its former self. The once comforting routines were now laced with a quiet, persistent anxiety. Parents kept their children closer, their playtime often confined to backyards, no longer trusting the familiar streets. Neighbors exchanged worried glances over fences, conversations inevitably turning to the latest grim news, the latest fear. Simple acts like walking to the mailbox became moments of apprehension. Would another letter appear? Whose name would it bear this time? The once vibrant community spaces, the parks, the town square, felt emptier, subdued. A collective breath was being held, waiting for the other shoe to drop, again and again. The Watcher hadn't just taken lives, they had stolen the town's peace of mind, replacing it with a gnawing, ever-present fear. The precision of the letters became more disturbing with each new arrival. It wasn't just names and dates, it was the chillingly specific details of the locations, the methods of death described with an almost clinical detachment. This wasn't vague fortune-telling, it was a detailed itinerary of murder. The Watchers seemed to know everything. They knew the victims' routines, their vulnerabilities, they knew the quiet, overlooked places where darkness could easily take root. This intimate knowledge fueled the growing terror. It suggested a presence that was not just observing from afar but was somehow enmeshed in the very fabric of the community, unseen yet all-seeing. The sense of being watched, of being potential targets in a terrifying game became an inescapable part of the local consciousness. Fear manifested in countless ways. Sales of new locks and home security systems surged. Previously open doors were now bolted day and night. Curtains were drawn tighter, shielding homes from unseen eyes that residents imagined lurking in the darkness outside. The simple trust that underpins any community was eroding, replaced by a creeping suspicion. Was the Watcher among them? Could it be someone they knew? A familiar face now potentially masking an unimaginable darkness? These unsettling thoughts, once dismissed as paranoid fantasies, began to take root in the fertile ground of shared terror. 6 letters had been enough to transform a peaceful town into a place haunted by an unseen, unknowable menace. Each delivered envelope was another nail in the coffin of their former tranquility. As the Watcher's reign of terror continued, unchecked and unexplained, the vacuum of knowledge was quickly filled by a torrent of speculation. Whispers turned into theories, theories into deeply entrenched beliefs. The sheer impossibility of the Watcher's foresight pushed people's imaginations to their limits. Who could possibly know such things? How could anyone predict these horrific events with such unfailing accuracy? The community, desperate for answers, began to look inward and outward, searching for any plausible explanation for the nightmare that had enveloped them. Every strange occurrence, every out-of-place individual, became a potential clue, a possible link to the shadowy figure orchestrating their fear. The unknown was a fertile ground for suspicion. Some residents started to voice a deeply unsettling theory. Was the Watcher a rogue law enforcement officer, or perhaps a former one? This idea, though terrifying, offered a grim kind of logic. Such an individual would possess knowledge of police procedures, access to information not available to the general public, and the skills to operate without leaving obvious traces. They would understand how to create fear, how to manipulate situations. The thought that one of their own protectors could be the architect of this horror sent a particular chill through the community. It was a betrayal of the highest order, a corruption of the very system designed to keep them safe. The Watcher's letters, so precise and clinical, seemed to some to echo the dispassionate tone of official reports, further fueling this disturbing line of thought. Others speculated that the Watcher might be a former criminal, someone with deep connections to an underworld that ordinary citizens could scarcely imagine. Perhaps they were privy to contracts, to planned hits, to the dark machinations of organized crime. Maybe the letters were a twisted form of boast, or a way to settle old scores by creating chaos and implicating others. This theory painted the Watcher as a cunning, ruthless individual, someone who moved in a world of violence and retribution, now using their inside knowledge to terrorize the innocent. The victims in this scenario might not be random at all, but rather pawns in a larger unseen conflict. The fear then became not just of the Watcher, but of the shadowy world they supposedly represented. And then there were the more outlandish yet increasingly discussed theories. Could the Watcher possess some form of genuine psychic ability? A dark gift or a terrible curse that allowed them to see these future tragedies? In a world where rational explanations failed, some began to consider the supernatural. Was Grey Ridge haunted by something beyond human understanding? These desperate speculations highlighted the profound psychological impact of the Watcher's reign. People were willing to entertain any possibility, no matter how improbable, to make sense of the senseless terror they were experiencing. The Watcher was more than just a criminal. They were becoming a local legend, a boogeyman whose powers seemed to grow with each new, horrifying letter that arrived. The paranoia was palpable, a thick fog over the town. The local police force, along with state investigators, found themselves grappling with an unprecedented crisis. The Watcher's letters were not just taunts, they were direct challenges to their authority, to their ability to protect the citizens they served. The pressure was immense, mounting with each new victim, each fulfilled prophecy. Task forces were formed, resources poured in, but the Watcher remained elusive, a ghost in the machine. Investigators worked tirelessly, poring over every detail of the letters, every aspect of the crime scenes, searching for any common thread, any mistake, any clue that might lead them to this phantom. The bulletin boards in the incident room became a sprawling tapestry of fear, covered with maps, photographs of victims, copies of the chilling letters, and countless red strings attempting to connect the disparate, terrifying dots. Public meetings were held in an attempt to reassure a terrified populace, but these often devolved into expressions of anger, fear, and frustration. Citizens demanded answers that the police simply did not have. How could this keep happening? Why couldn't they stop the Watcher? Officers, many of whom were members of the same frightened community, shared the public's dread, but were bound by the slow, methodical nature of police work. They urged vigilance, pleaded for any information no matter how insignificant it might seem. But the Watcher left no fingerprints, no DNA, no witnesses, only the chilling letters and the bodies of the victims. The investigation felt like chasing smoke, always a step behind, always reacting to the Watcher's latest move. The police explored every conceivable angle. They profiled potential suspects, from disgruntled locals to individuals with a history of making threats. They re-examined old unsolved cases, wondering if the Watcher had been active before, their earlier signals missed. Undercover operations were launched, surveillance teams deployed, but the Watcher's uncanny ability to predict events without being directly implicated was baffling. It was as if they operated on a different plane of existence, privy to a script that no one else could read. The strain on law enforcement was visible. Officers worked longer hours, their faces etched with fatigue and frustration. Each new letter was a fresh failure, a stark reminder of their inability to break the cycle of fear. The investigation itself became a source of further anxiety for some. The increased police presence, while intended to reassure, also served as a constant reminder of the ongoing threat. Roadblocks, increased patrols, and investigators asking questions became part of the new, unsettling normal. Some residents grew wary of the police themselves, internalizing the darker theories about the Watcher's identity. Trust was a fragile commodity, easily shattered in such a climate of fear. The police were not just hunting a killer or a predictor of death, they were battling an epidemic of terror that threatened to tear the fabric of the community apart. The Watcher remained one step ahead, a seemingly omniscient puppet master pulling the strings from the shadows, leaving the authorities to grapple with the horrifying results. The relentless onslaught of the Watcher's letters and the ensuing murders created a profound psychological impact on the entire region. It was more than just fear of physical harm. It was a deeper, more insidious erosion of security and certainty. Experts, including criminal psychologists and sociologists, were consulted, their insights broadcast in hushed tones on news reports, attempting to dissect the mind of this enigmatic figure. One prevailing theory, as voiced by a reenacted psychologist in media segments, suggested that the Watcher's actions were driven by more than just a desire to predict death. This was more than just knowledge, the expert opined gravely. It was obsession, and possibly guilt. This analysis opened up a new, disturbing avenue of speculation. Was the Watcher tormented by their foreknowledge? Were the letters a desperate, twisted attempt to offload a burden too heavy to bear alone? If guilt was a factor, it implied a closer connection to the events than merely observing them. Perhaps the Watcher knew the perpetrators, or was even being forced to relay these grim tidings. This theory painted a more complex, perhaps even tragic picture of the Watcher, though it did little to alleviate the terror they caused. The idea of an obsessed individual, fixated on death and its details, was deeply unsettling. It suggested a mind consumed by darkness, a mind that found some perverse satisfaction or release in sharing these horrific premonitions, regardless of the devastating impact on the recipients and the wider community. The question of the Watcher's role, passive observer or active participant, became a central point of torment for both the public and the investigators. Were they simply watching, as their moniker suggested, a detached entity with a window into future horrors? Or were they, in some way, pulling the strings? Could they be subtly influencing events, nudging them towards their predicted outcome? The letters themselves were so precise, so confident, that it was difficult to dismiss the possibility of a more active involvement. If the Watcher wasn't committing the murders themselves, were they connected to a network of killers? Were they the mouthpiece for a more sinister organization? The ambiguity was terrifying, as it left open the possibility of a far larger, more coordinated threat. This constant uncertainty bred a climate of intense suspicion. Friendships were strained, and casual acquaintances were viewed with a new, critical eye. The Watcher had managed to turn the community against itself, fostering an environment where anyone could be a suspect, or indeed, the next victim. The psychological toll was immense. People reported increased anxiety, sleeplessness, and a pervasive sense of helplessness. The world no longer felt like a predictable, safe place. The Watcher, through their campaign of terror, had exposed the fragility of that illusion, revealing the dark undercurrents that could lie beneath the surface of even the most ordinary-seeming town. The city was not just gripped by fear. It was being slowly suffocated by it, its collective psyche deeply wounded by an enemy they could neither see nor understand. The Watcher's reign seemed impenetrable. Letter after chilling letter arrived, each a perfect, horrifying prophecy. The meticulous planning, the flawless execution of these warnings painted a picture of an almost omniscient entity, an entity that made no mistakes, an entity that was always one step ahead, watching from an untouchable distance. For months this narrative of infallibility had held Grey Ridge and its surrounding areas in a vice of fear. No one expected the Watcher to slip. No one imagined that the intricate web of terror they had so carefully woven could ever begin to unravel. But even the most careful predator can misstep, and sometimes the smallest, most unexpected error can bring the entire dark edifice crashing down. The break in the case wouldn't come from a clever deduction or a dramatic chase. It would begin with a simple, mundane accident. Deep within the humming, cavernous expanse of a regional postal sorting facility, amidst the blur of conveyor belts and the ceaseless clatter of machinery, thousands upon thousands of letters moved each day, each envelope a tiny vessel carrying news, bills, advertisements, or personal messages, sorted by indifferent machines and hurried hands. In this relentless river of paper, one letter, seemingly no different from countless others, was about to become the most important piece of mail in the entire state. It was not addressed to a victim. It was not addressed to the police or the press. It was, like the others, a Watcher letter. But this one carried a different destiny. It was destined not for delivery but for discovery. A discovery that would inadvertently pierce the veil of the Watcher's anonymity. During a routine sort, a postal worker, perhaps tired from a long shift, noticed an envelope that had become slightly damaged by the sorting machinery. A small tear, a crumpled corner. Usually, such minor damage might be overlooked, or the letter simply rerouted for repair and eventual delivery. But something about this particular envelope caught the worker's eye. It was the now familiar plainness, the typed address, lacking a return sender, that echoed the descriptions circulating in hushed tones and news reports about the Watcher's terrifying correspondence. A flicker of unease, a gut feeling. Instead of being sent on its dark errand, this letter was set aside. It was pulled from the relentless flow, a tiny anomaly in a vast system. Its journey was unexpectedly interrupted, its message of impending doom momentarily silenced. This single, damaged, undelivered letter became the thread, the one loose end that investigators, drowning in a sea of fear and frustration, so desperately needed. It wasn't a dramatic interception based on a tip-off. It wasn't the result of a high-tech surveillance operation, it was chance. A simple accident in a place far removed from the crime scenes and the terrorized homes. The Watcher, for all their meticulous planning, had not accounted for the fallibility of the postal system itself. This undelivered warning, this letter that broke the silence not by its content, but by its failure to arrive, was about to speak volumes. It held within its slightly torn paper the first tangible clue that could lead investigators out of the darkness and towards the light of an answer. The Watcher's perfect record was about to be shattered. The damaged envelope quickly found its way into the hands of the special task force assigned to the Watcher case. This letter felt different. Investigators pored over it with renewed intensity. The print itself, the way the ink formed the letters, sparked a new lead. It wasn't the output of a modern printer. The characters were composed of tiny, distinct dots. This was the work of a dot matrix printer. Once ubiquitous, dot matrix printers had long been superseded by newer technologies. Who still used a dot matrix printer? This was a clue that grounded the Watcher in a more traceable reality. The discovery was a seismic shift in the investigation. They had a technological fingerprint. A dot matrix printer was specific and rare. The distinctive whine and clatter of such a machine could lead them to their quarry. The Watcher's reliance on this fading technology provided the trail they needed. Investigators started compiling lists of businesses and individuals who might still use dot matrix printers. The distinctive print of the Watcher's letters was now a beacon, guiding the investigation. The search for the source of the dot matrix printing was methodical. Investigators contacted office supply companies, repair technicians, and businesses that dealt in older equipment. The Watcher's choice of such an archaic tool made them vulnerable. A functioning dot matrix printer in active use was a rarity. Weeks into this new line of inquiry, a lead emerged. It pointed towards a small print shop, Print Solutions. The shop specialized in older printing methods. The elderly proprietor confirmed he still operated a dot matrix printer. Investigators reviewed transaction logs and security footage. The grainy footage showed a figure in a hooded sweatshirt, using gloved hands to handle the paper and cash payment. They requested a simple print job, providing the text on a USB drive. The figure was a ghost, their identity shrouded, but they were a physical presence, captured on video. The footage showed them using the dot matrix printer. Print Solutions had unwittingly served as the conduit for the Watcher's messages. The next step was to give that fleeting image a name, a face, an identity. The security footage from Print Solutions presented its own challenges. The hooded figure's face remained obscured. The gloves prevented any hope of fingerprints. Investigators reviewed footage of the moments before and after the figure entered the shop. The figure walked out and got into a parked car. The vehicle was unremarkable, but the cameras captured it. Investigators began the process of video enhancement. They were looking for any detail that could make the car unique. Most importantly, they were hunting for the license plate. Hours were spent analyzing blurry images. Slowly, fragments of the license plate emerged. Cross-referencing these fragments with DMV databases narrowed the possibilities. Finally, a breakthrough, a license plate. It was registered to Derek Madsen. Initial background checks painted a picture of an ordinary man. The police now had a name, an address, a prime suspect. The license plate unlocked a name, Derek Madsen. Teams were mobilized with quiet urgency. They approached Derek Madsen's suburban home under the cloak of an ordinary evening. The arrest itself was unnervingly calm. When officers knocked on Derek Madsen's door, he answered it himself. There was no surprise on his face, no fear, no attempt to flee or resist. He simply stood there, his expression placid, almost vacant. As the charges were read, he remained utterly impassive. This profound lack of emotion was perhaps more chilling than any outburst. The detectives found themselves unsettled. This was not the reaction of a man cornered. It was something else. The silence from Madsen was deafening. The unmasking was just the beginning of a deeper, more disturbing inquiry. The search of Derek Madsen's residence began almost immediately after his arrest. The home was meticulously tidy, almost unnervingly so. There was an orderliness that bordered on sterile. In a locked study, the true nature of Derek Madsen's private world began to unfurl. It was here they found the notebooks, dozens of them, filled with cramped, precise handwriting. These were detailed chronicles of obsession. Page after page contained hand-drawn diagrams of streets, buildings, and isolated areas, crime maps, meticulously annotated with dates, times, and cryptic symbols. The sheer volume of this self-generated intelligence was staggering. Alongside the notebooks, investigators uncovered stacks of newspaper clippings, articles about local crimes, obituaries, and community news features. Each was carefully cut out, often cross-referenced with notes in the margins. And then, in a dusty corner of the study, they found it. An old, beige dot matrix printer, connected to an equally antiquated computer. The Lair of Obsession was not just in his mind, it was a tangible space, filled with the chilling paraphernalia of his dark pastime. Derek Madsen sat in the stark, gray interrogation room. The air was thick with unspoken questions. He remained remarkably composed, his hands resting quietly on the steel table before him. His gaze was steady, meeting that of the seasoned detectives without a flicker of nervousness or defiance. He seemed almost detached from the gravity of his situation. The investigators began their questioning carefully, methodically, laying out the evidence they had gathered, the print shop footage, the car, the items found in his home. They watched him closely for any reaction, any break in his unnerving calm. But Madsen simply listened, his expression unchanging, as if they were discussing the weather or the plot of some uninteresting film. Then he began to speak. His voice was monotone, devoid of inflection. He confessed. He readily admitted to writing and sending every single one of the Watcher letters. The letter to Susan Mallory, the letter to the Grey Ridge Chronicle. All of them. He recited details about their content, their recipients, with a chilling accuracy that mirrored the precision of the letters themselves. There was no hint of remorse in his voice, no sign of regret for the terror he had inflicted. It was a flat, factual recitation, as if he were merely confirming a series of logistical details. He had been the author of the fear, the architect of the dread that had consumed an entire community. And he spoke of it as if it were a job completed, a task fulfilled. When pressed for a motive, for the reason behind his campaign of terror, Derek Madsen offered an explanation that was both simple and profoundly disturbing. "I wanted to test the system," he stated, his eyes holding a flicker of something that might have been intellectual pride. He spoke of a curiosity to see how people would react, how the police would respond, if events would unfold as he predicted. It was, in his mind, an experiment, a grand, elaborate test of societal responses, of fate, of his own ability to foresee, or perhaps even influence. Human lives were merely data points in his grotesque study. This chilling, arrogant detachment from the human cost of his experiment sent a fresh wave of revulsion through the investigators. He saw himself not as a monster, but as a social scientist of the macabre. But then came the crucial part of his confession, the part that twisted the knife of mystery even deeper. While Derek Madsen freely admitted to authoring the letters, to being the Watcher who warned of impending doom, he vehemently denied committing any of the murders themselves. He insisted he had no hand in the actual killings. He was merely the messenger, the prophet of these violent ends. He claimed he was never present at any of the crime scenes when the deaths occurred. This assertion, delivered with the same calm conviction as the rest of his statement, threw the case into fresh turmoil. If he was telling the truth, then the most terrifying question of all remained unanswered. How did he know? The investigators were initially skeptical of Derek Madsen's claim that he was merely a predictor, not a perpetrator. It seemed too convenient a defense, a way to confess to the lesser crime of sending threatening letters while evading responsibility for the actual murders. They immediately began the intensive process of verifying his whereabouts during each of the 6 homicides that had been foretold by the Watcher. They cross-referenced his work schedule, his financial records, any digital footprint he might have left. They braced themselves to dismantle what they assumed would be a carefully constructed web of lies. What they found, however, was far more shocking and far more terrifying than any lie Madsen could have concocted. The truth of his alibis began to emerge, stark and undeniable. For at least 3 of the murders, and possibly more as the investigation continued, Derek Madsen possessed airtight alibis. Verifiable, solid, irrefutable proof that he was nowhere near the crime scenes when the victims met their gruesome ends. Security camera footage from his workplace showed him clocking in and out miles away. ATM receipts placed him in different towns. Credit card transactions for mundane purchases like gasoline or groceries painted a picture of a man engaged in ordinary life, far removed from the brutal realities of the killings. Witness testimony from colleagues or acquaintances further corroborated his claims. He physically could not have been in 2 places at once. He could not have been the hand that pulled the trigger or wielded the weapon. He truly wasn't there. This discovery plunged the investigation into an abyss of uncertainty. If Derek Madsen, the self-confessed watcher, was not the killer, then how did he possess such impossibly precise foreknowledge of each murder? How could he detail the victim, the location, the date, and the method with such chilling accuracy if he wasn't involved in the act itself? The letters were not vague premonitions, they were detailed blueprints of death. The terrifying implication began to dawn on everyone involved. Was Derek Madsen part of a larger, more sinister network? Was he being fed information by the actual killers, or was there someone else, an unknown entity, providing him with these deadly scripts? Some questions had indeed been answered. The author of the Watcher letters, the man who had terrorized the region with his pen, was now known. Derek Madsen was behind bars, convicted for his role in sowing fear and conspiracy. But the silence that followed his confession was not one of resolution. It was a silence pregnant with new, darker possibilities. The murders themselves remained unsolved, the actual perpetrators still at large. And the greatest mystery of all, the source of the Watcher's uncanny knowledge, lingered like a poisonous fog. Had they merely caught a mouthpiece, a scribe for a more profound evil? The letters had stopped, but the chilling feeling of being watched, of unseen forces at play, had not entirely disappeared. Other questions, more terrifying than before, were just beginning to whisper in the dark. Derek Madsen sits confined within the stark, unforgiving walls of a state penitentiary. His conviction was for conspiracy, for the psychological torment he unleashed, for the terror he meticulously crafted with each chilling letter. With his arrest, the stream of ominous envelopes abruptly ceased. No more predictions arrived to haunt mailboxes or newsrooms. On the surface, a chapter had closed. The tangible manifestation of the Watcher was caged. Yet for the residents of Grey Ridge and the surrounding towns, this resolution felt hollow, incomplete. They knew, with a certainty born of shared trauma, that Madsen's imprisonment was not the full story, not the final answer to the darkness that had visited them. The true killers, those who had actually shed the blood, remained shadows. The town of Grey Ridge slowly, cautiously, began the arduous process of trying to reclaim its stolen peace. Children started playing in the streets again, though perhaps a little closer to home than before. Neighbors exchanged greetings that were less strained, less shadowed by suspicion. The visible threat, the author of the terrifying letters, Derek Madsen, was gone from their daily lives. But the psychological scars, deep and jagged, remained etched into the community's collective psyche. The relief that permeated the air was undeniably tainted, mixed with a persistent, lingering unease. It was the disquieting feeling that while one monster had been identified, others, perhaps more dangerous, still lurked just beyond their perception, unseen and unknown. The police investigation into the actual murders, the brutal endings of Timothy Granger, Linda Crowley and the others, officially remained open. Madsen's chilling confession about authoring the letters had slammed one door shut, providing a name and a face to the phantom prophet. However, in doing so, it had simultaneously blown open another far more disturbing portal. This new doorway led into a murky labyrinth concerning the identities and motives of the actual perpetrators of these heinous crimes. If Madsen was merely the scribe, who then were the authors of the violence itself? Were they individuals he knew? Or was he somehow tapping into a source of information so dark, so obscure, it defied all rational explanation? The most unsettling aspect, the fact that continued to haunt investigators and citizens alike, was the undeniable truth of Derek Madsen's alibis. He was not the killer, He was demonstrably elsewhere when the lives were taken. Yet, he knew. He knew every terrible detail in advance. This stark contradiction resonated deeply, a chilling testament to a mystery far from solved. His claim of testing the system echoed with a perverse accuracy. The system had indeed been tested, and while it had captured the messenger, it had profoundly failed to unearth the deeper, more horrifying truth about the source of his deadly knowledge, or the hands that carried out the acts. The silence of the actual killers was a heavy, suffocating blanket. Even with Derek Madsen behind bars, a certain chilling residue of fear lingered stubbornly in the air. The letters had stopped, yes, but the unanswered questions resonated like disturbing echoes in the newfound quiet. The source of his incredible, terrifyingly accurate information remained an enigma, a gaping hole in the narrative of the Watcher. Was the phenomenon of the Watcher truly embodied and concluded in the singular, strange figure of Madsen? Or was he merely a cog in a larger, unseen machine of malice? The deeply unsettling feeling of being watched, of unseen eyes scrutinizing their lives, did not entirely dissipate with his arrest. It had burrowed too deep into the communal subconscious. The unresolved questions continued to torment the public imagination, fueling countless whispered theories and late-night discussions. Who were the actual murderers that Madsen had so effectively shielded, whether intentionally or not? Was he a willing accomplice, protecting them with his silence on their identities while reveling in his own twisted game of prophecy? Or was he a pawn, manipulated by forces far more sinister than himself, fed information for reasons unknown? And then there was the most unsettling possibility of all. Did he somehow, through some inexplicable, almost paranormal means, genuinely glean this information from the ether? The sheer enigma of his prescient knowledge defied easy answers, leaving a void where logic should reside. The legacy of the Watcher became deeply woven into the fabric of local folklore. The case transformed into a chilling cautionary tale, a grim reminder whispered from one generation to the next. It irrevocably altered the community's perception of safety, of normalcy, of the very nature of the unseen world around them. The ordinary surface of their quiet suburban lives had been violently ripped away, revealing the potential for profound darkness to exist just beneath. The comfort of anonymity in a crowd, the trust in the familiar, had been eroded, replaced by a more wary, more guarded outlook. The Watcher had taught them that monsters did not always announce themselves with roars, but sometimes with quiet, typed letters. Ultimately, the saga of the Watcher who knew too much serves as a disturbing meditation on the nature of evil and the terrifying power of hidden knowledge. Derek Madsen's actions, his chilling pronouncements, dared people to listen, and in listening, they were drawn into a vortex of fear. Evil is not always loud, one might reflect, echoing the chilling sentiment that sometimes it whispers warnings and dares you to listen. The terrifying thought remains, if one Watcher could exist, meticulously chronicling and predicting death from the shadows, could there be others? Out there, somewhere, perhaps someone else is still watching, still waiting, still planning their own silent, terrifying pronouncements. The silence left behind is heavy with such unspoken, chilling possibilities. Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Crime Files Unlocked for more chilling and true crime stories.